Hello, welcome back to Life as Life with Lydia. In today's episode, we'll be looking at how to come up with an emergency fund. Before we get into details of that, we'll first begin by defining what an emergency fund is, then later on go into looking at how to determine how much money we need to build our emergency fund, and also look at how then we'll start working towards building this emergency fund, or rather the amount, because then we would have known how much we are working towards. An emergency fund could be said to be a stash of money that has been put aside to become handy when we have an unforeseen situation. Now, there are different unforeseen situations. For some people, it could be a car breaking down before it's due, some form of maintenance, or a health situation. It could be you or someone in your immediate family, because also I should note that with an emergency fund, you also need to determine who is a beneficiary. It's always important to be very clear on who can access this money. Is this emergency fund just for you, or is it for your family, so that you'll be able to know at which point you come through for people and at which point you come through for yourself. So yeah, there are different situations. So this could be your emergency or somebody else's emergency. Now, how do we come up with this emergency fund? Obviously, I have heard like people say coming up with an amount of money that is equivalent to 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. So basically, if it's that, then it's for your own, like, because I was saying earlier that you need to define who are the beneficiaries. So if you follow that route, it's basically for you and the people that are living with you at the moment. And this could be when you don't have a job or you don't have a steady income that is coming through. Moving away from the living expenses, I also think about, what is something that is huge that can happen to you that will need sort of some financial muscle. I know that people buy different insurance plans, which is also good, but I also think it's important to have money that you can easily access, money where you don't have to start filling in documents and explaining yourself why you need to withdraw that money, but money that you have just been keeping aside. It makes things a whole lot easier. Now, when you think about what this big situation is, let's say maybe in your wildest dreams, okay, you say, what if I got ill and I had to travel? Maybe in the Zambian context, for some people to receive care, they might have to travel out of the country. Probably not very necessary in the UK, I would say. But maybe in the Zambian context, somebody might want to travel out of the country to receive care. I mean, you could have an insurance policy, but maybe that insurance policy just covers for you. And maybe you need to go with somebody else. Who pays for that somebody else? The emergency fund can come in handy. For me, it's also, I would say, traveling to Zambia on the spot like that, because most of my relatives live in Zambia, and there are certain situations that happen in my family and I would love to be there, but that means I need to have the financial muscle to go, and that's an air ticket, and buying an air ticket on the spot is not a cheap or easy thing to do. So all those things, so that might make you come up with how much you need, because I feel like following the 3 to 6 months route of living expenses is that it might not be that much money, but then when you think about another situation that might require more money, it means you have something bigger that you're working towards, and there is no harm having a whole lot more money in your emergency fund than you would think you need. So yeah, and once we come up, obviously all these different situations that I've given will help you determine how much you need to come up with in your emergency fund. Is it a 10,000 kwacha? Is it a 5,000 pounds? And then you begin to work towards it. Now, how do we work towards it? It's important to have a set amount of money monthly that you will dedicate to putting aside for your emergencies. Now, this money, we have to remember, it's not savings. It's not savings for investments or other types of savings. This is purely for your emergency. And it's also important to ask yourself, how long do I want to take to build up this emergency? How long you want to take could also be guided by how much you can afford to put aside, because you need to be realistic. You're not going to break your back because you have important expenses that you need to meet for the month. I'm using the word important because there are times that we spend money on things that are not important. So for the sake of the emergency fund, we'll have to forego, the items that are wants on our budget, and then focus on our needs so that we can build our emergency fund. And that means every month you dedicate. This is an important fund. So you don't say, I'll do every 2-3 months, every 4-5 months. It's easier when you're doing it on a monthly basis. You put aside, and you know what? Sometimes an emergency can happen whilst you are building up your fund. But even that, for me, I think it's okay. It's not like you're completely broke. At least you have somewhere to set your foot and start. So dedicate a certain amount of time, or rather, no, not time. Did I just say time? Lydia, a certain amount of money every month to put aside. Now, you have to be disciplined. It's just important to be disciplined. It's very easy to hear somebody say, I have a situation, could you please lend me money? You need to be very strict with your emergency fund. Sometimes people might call you greedy, but, well, people say things and we just have to live with some of the things that people say. So you have to be very disciplined, and this is money that is just not out there. And like I earlier said, it's very important to define who is a beneficiary to this emergency fund, and also determining what sort of emergencies that you are saving towards. Because sometimes just saying it's an emergency fund, I think it's not enough. Because there are times situations happen and you're like, oh yeah, that's an emergency. Oh yeah, this. And then you begin to spend. And when a real emergency comes through, you don't even have the money. So define what sort of emergencies are you saving for? For me, like I had earlier given an example, one of the things that falls in my emergency fund is if I have to, on the spot, travel to Zambia. And also, for me, I have them split. So I have the bigger emergency fund, and I have the smaller emergency fund, which I build. It's for a monthly, it's on a monthly basis. All right, so this emergency fund is if something happened to me in that month. Okay, and this is small things like on a day when it's a public holiday and there are no buses or a train is cancelled, or a bus is out of service and I'm running late for work. I dip into what I call a contingency fund. So this is on a short term, but this is different. So I don't go and dip in my emergency fund to fund for my Uber or my taxi on that day. I go to my contingency fund. So this is a rather small amount. But sometimes it just happens that in that month I don't have anything that is an emergency, and that money basically would go either to my savings, or I would make a decision whether it goes to my emergency fund. So yeah, that's what I follow. But an emergency fund, really, it also reduces your levels of stress. Okay, so it's something that we have to dedicate and be focused towards. I hope that was helpful. Please, let's keep sharing. If you have any other views on how to build an emergency fund, please feel free to share, drop your comments, and I'll be happy to hear from you. From me, it's bye-bye until next time.